Right now, transportation officials are celebrating the success of the nation's newest intercity passenger rail line. The Chicago and Northwestern's 400 began service just over 2 years ago, and they've hit a significant milestone. 400,000 people have taken the train as of earlier today. The train currently runs from Chicago to Madison, Wisconsin, making the trip in under 2 hours. But as you'll hear tonight, the line will be expanding. And soon.
That high-speed rail is a good way to help our state, our region, and our country.
Work on the rail line started in 2009, after the states of Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota entered into an agreement with the Chicago and Northwestern to develop a publicly subsidized intercity train service from Chicago to the Twin Cities. In 2012, the route began operations, but only running to Madison while the CNW worked on constructing the rest of the line north towards the Twin Cities. The CNW expected humble beginnings for the service. They purchased second-hand equipment from Amtrak to buy time for them to find a company who could build brand new train sets for the line. But ridership has completely smashed expectations, and CNW was eager to speed up its construction efforts to finish the line. But its state partners had largely ignored its request for more funding until a very recent announcement changed the game.
We are pleased to announce that Super Bowl 52 in 2018 will be played in Minnesota. Congratulations.
With the NFL announcing that Minneapolis will host the Super Bowl in 2018, Minnesota suddenly wanted the line done in time for the big game. To win over Wisconsin and Illinois, they agreed to add stations in Eau Claire and Crystal Lake. Even with those stops, the 400 will be able to make the trip in just over 4 hours, more than an hour faster than if you drove that distance in your car. Last month, they announced they had secured enough public funding to complete the line well in advance of the Super Bowl, giving the CNW time it needs to put the finishing touches on the highly anticipated service. And as construction continues up north, there are plenty of riders already taking advantage in Chicago, Janesville, and Madison. In fact, there are more than 400,000 of them so far. Back to you.
The railroad says they plan on expanding service up to Eau Claire by the end of 2014 and finally reaching the Twin Cities by the second quarter of 2015.
Hey everybody, Tim here, back with another Chicago Northwestern Harvard Subdivision and N-Scale. Huge shout out to everybody. There was an amazing response from the last video that I posted, so thank you for that. And I thought it'd be fun to start this video with a little bit of an update on what's happening in the timeline of the layout, because remember, part of the inspiration for my layout is the Utah belt that keeps moving chronologically forward. So I've been keeping track of a timeline of events as I move my layout forward. Remember, it's we're currently in 2014. We're moving forward, but 10 years behind the present. And so that was a news article that I put together using some AI voices and some actual news clips from 2010, 2011, 2012 to give an update on what's going on with the passenger service developing on the Harvard Sub. But the theme for this video today is focusing on doing kind of the necessary but not necessarily like flashy or fun elements to prep for the next big phase of layout construction. You know, I hit the huge milestone last time of getting all the track laid, but before I can really jump into scenery, I want to make sure that I get some important things done that are time-consuming, but important and necessary to having a smoothly operating layout, and to have some fun, you know, running trains as they work their way through the layout. So that's the main theme, is kind of showing you what all those things are in preparation of taking the next big steps with the layout. So the first kind of chore, if you will, that I worked on was actually going through and programming my trains into consists by programming the CV values. It's 19, 21, and 22 that you need to change. You can see I'm programming them in right here. I'll link you to the YouTube video that I used to really kind of walk me through. Once you figure out what you need the variables to be, it's actually fairly straightforward. And if you're unfamiliar with how to program these CVs to set your consists, essentially you're setting the address that you can plug in as your locomotive, and then it sends signals to all the locomotives in that consist. But also you have a lot of control over which locomotives will respond to function commands when you activate that consist. So for example, you really only want your lead locomotive to have the headlights turn on when you hit the 0 button. So you can, when you go to program it, you can program the trailing locomotives to not. Now I noticed as I got these 3 locomotives, because I just wanted this consist to be 3-9s, I noticed an issue, and I slowed this down so you can actually hear it. I made the mistake of programming and allowing the second locomotive to also have full function responsiveness for its sound functions. And so I want all the engines to turn on, right, for all of the locomotives, but you're going to hear in just a second when I go to test it moving forward, you're going to hear 2 horns going. Kind of a real nice tight stereo, but you can definitely tell it's not just the lead locomotive sounding the horn. I didn't want that, so I did have to go back and adjust the CV21 on the second locomotive to make sure that it doesn't actually have that. So you'll see that here in just a second. I'm going back in and making the adjustment as I back the locomotives up so I can test it out and get it to where it needs to be. So I'm writing it down. I've got the locomotive back on the programming track that you see in the background. I'm changing it also. I realized I had the light enabled and I don't want that. So I got that fixed and made sure everything was good to go. And then it came time to test the consist again. I'm only showing you one consist. I programmed 4 different consists. There's a few more that I want to program, but this is a good start. I also realized that I'm going to have to really do some speed matching. I figured with consists like these, I mean, these are all 3 scale trains -9s, all from the same production run, all came in the same order. I figured that they'd be close enough to be fine, but in some off-camera work, I realized they're not, and they were actually fighting each other a little bit when I ran them, so I'm going to have to do some speed matching. But you can tell sound-wise, it's closer to where it needs to be. So I'll do some speed matching. I might show that in another video, but that's an added item on the to-do list where, again, just to make sure that when I do run the trains, everything's looking smooth. I'm not putting any undue stress or wear on one particular locomotive. The next thing, and this clip from last time kind of shows it really well, you can see there's gaps in the ties, right, where the flex track sections come together. You take some ties off at the end, you got to put the rail joiners on. There's noticeable gaps in the ties that are obviously, it's not something you visually want. And Pico sells spare ties that slide under, and it's a bit of a challenge with the Pico Code 55 because it actually is double flanged. It's got a rail underneath the Code 55, which is partially what gives it its durability and why I like it as a flex track, but it means you can't just slide spare ties under. You got to get their special ones. But thankfully my local hobby store has had plenty of packs available, and so it came time to work on this element next. Triple track mainline over all the running feet that I have. It was a little under 200 ties that I was going to have to place, so I was not looking forward to this because it's not fun because you got to slide them all in. You can see I've got gaps even up to here under the where I laid the track last year that I've got to lay. So I've got quite a bit of this that I have to do. It's going to be time consuming. It's not going to be fun. But again, this is an example of something that I don't want to move forward with, scenery, especially not ballasting, until I get this done. And so this is an important step.
So I just got this section done, and I'm just working. What you can see is I've gone around and just dropped the ties off on the joints. I took this piece of flex track here and just kind of measured out how many ties I'm missing, making sure I'm leaving them there. And so you can see for now, I've got enough of the sleepers, the ties, to cover most. We go all the way around, and I need to order, I think, 3 more packs. So I've got to get enough ties to cover here, these joints, these joints, these joints, and then these joints right here. But otherwise, I've got enough ties, and this is where having a triple track main line really becomes a bummer because it's triple the work. So I've just been working on a segment for about 10-15 minutes and then going away doing something else and then coming back. So like you can see, you can't really tell, for example, where the missing ties were until you notice like where soldering work was. So here's replacement ties, here's replacement ties. The one spot though where it doesn't really work very well is where the insulated rail joiners are. They're too thick underneath to slip the ties under, but I don't think it'll be that bad. I might cut some pieces or 3D print some pieces and put them in to fill the gaps, but otherwise that's the main way I'm approaching it, because it's tedious and time consuming, but if you do it in little chunks it becomes more manageable.
And you don't obviously need to actually see all those ties get put in, so we'll fast forward with the beauty of technology in a montage before we move on to checking off the next big item on the to-do list to prep for major scenery and development. So as you notice now as I'm panning around, minus where the insulated rail joiners are, like right here, you're really not noticing any gaps anymore, which is huge. And it was good to check this off the to-do list. And I was eager to check another thing off, more things off the to-do list. We got slightly delayed though. We had a really nasty windstorm roll through town that actually knocked power out for a decent period of time. Thankfully our yard was fine. We didn't sustain any damage, but you can see this is me driving through near my house. Look at that tree right there. There's some pretty serious damage. So we had to wait a little bit, but once the power was back on, the next step was to identify areas where I needed to make some modifications to the track work. And the main area is right here. You can see it's a pretty steep angle. You notice the couplers are kind of losing their height a little bit here, and so I wanted to go through.
Okay, so it took a little bit of time, and I didn't think to take a video of it, so I'll describe what I did. I just used this because it's kind of long and narrow. and worked my way under the road bed to lift it from the glue and help take it up. I figured out how I wanted to get the angle smooth, and then I had some pretty thin, really thin, 1/2 mil styrene that I used about halfway between where I wanted the slope to start and actually end, to help give it some stability before, ballast and everything else will come down to secure it, to make for, it's a much smoother transition. It's still not 100% perfect because there's still an angle. You'll see as these cars go through, you'll see the couplers drop in height slightly, but it's far better than what it was before. So I'm much happier with how this looks. It's going to be much smoother, and it's especially going to be important when intermodal trains are going through, because not necessarily these, not the Jacksonville terminal cars. I'm not as concerned about those because they operate by themselves. But when the Kato units, which are all linked, roll over, I won't have the derailments and the uncouplings issues that I had when I've been running trains over the past week. So much happier with this. But this is the kind of, again, example of the important stuff to go back through and do to make sure that you're happy with your track work before you go through and start actually doing scenery and other pieces that make it much harder to correct later. And I know I'll have more sections I need to work on. I'm going to keep checking and running trains to find that out. But the next big thing to work on is starting to paint the rails. And this is a little bit trickier with the modern concrete ties, because you can't just spray paint, and just blend the same color for rail and ties. And so it's time consuming, but I taped it down, and with the beauty of a montage, you'll get to see me paint the first section up. So the tape is obviously really time consuming. I've tried hand, just with a brush, trying to do it by hand, but I find it's inconsistent on my brush strokes. There'll be gaps that, the underlying color gets exposed. This is just, to me, it's worth the time investment to do the taping off and then just doing the spray paint. I really like this color. I just picked it up from Lowe's. It's a nice, it matches the brown tones that you usually see with rail out in the real world. And I'm just going to go kind of, sections at a time like you're seeing right here, just, again, to help keep it manageable, because I feel like it's a real fast way to burn out if I try and do, the entire first level of track painted in one go. But if I work in 20, 30-minute segments at a time, it'll keep it manageable, but I'll be able to see progress moving forward. I wanted to start with this section because although it's a straightaway, it's a little trickier with all those switches right there, and so I wanted to start there and work my way over in the areas where there isn't a backdrop installed. Obviously, I'll need to do a little bit more to protect the backdrop back near some of the original track work, so I figured I'd start here, work my way over on what was recently built, and then go back and finish those areas off. And this is something I know some folks don't bother with this step, other folks do. This is a step that I really feel is important because, when you look over, I took all the tape off, obviously. I just feel it makes the track look a whole lot more realistic. And, especially once, you get the ballasting, everything down, it'll really show. But you'll see here in a second, I'll go to the other end
where I got to the point where I, had stopped taping off, obviously, and I feel you get a pretty clear visual right here. You get a pretty clear visual contrast in terms of why it's beneficial. So it was good to get that process started. This is a process that I'll finish in the next video, and we're already at we're at the 20-minute mark. I feel like it's a nice length for the episode, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up by talking about my plans for the next episode. I started this video off by giving you kind of an update on the timeline of the layout with that fake news story. Hopefully you liked that angle. If you did, I'll try and put something together like that in the future. But I figured it'd be good to alternate between timeline updates and layout design updates. So in the next episode, I do want to show you my current plans for what the second level will look like, along with some additional details on structures and landscape and scenery for the main level, partially based on your feedback. But in addition to that, the main thrust of the next episode will just be wrapping up kind of the quote-unquote not fun prep work for scenery. I'm going to go through there's a couple more spots of track work I need to redo. There's a bit of wiring I need to redo. And then I need to finish with the joint compound and sanding, both for the backdrops and between the foam sections. Obviously finish weathering the track. And then I'm hoping to start building some additional things to install onto the layout. I've got the signal kit that I want to build and use for where you were seeing me paint earlier, and I want to get that done. So that's kind of what's in the cards. So again, thank you very much for all of your ongoing support and your comments and thoughts and suggestions. If you haven't, please make sure to like the video. Definitely make sure to subscribe. We passed the 1,000 subscriber mark, so thank you for helping us reach that goal. And until next time, I will keep on working on the layout, and I'll have an update for you soon. Thanks, everyone.